with my friend and colleague Ligia Cushman. We're really looking forward to this and are excited to be part of the conference. So we will go ahead and get started. If you wish to introduce yourself in the chat and say who you are and where you're from, you're welcome to, so that you and your peers on the session can know who's here, but no pressure if you don't want to do that. As Gwen said, this is a session called Key Concepts and Strategies for Recruiting Foster Parents. And we are going to be covering a lot of ideas and approaches, but hopefully some concrete ideas and strategies that you can put to use in your work. So let's dive in. So just briefly, I want to say a bit about where Ligia and I are coming from for this work. We are both part of a project called AdoptUSKids, and AdoptUSKids is a federally funded project funded by the Children's Bureau at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And we have a two-pronged mission in this project. One, sorry, I got muted there. One part of our mission is to raise public awareness about the need for foster and adoptive families for children in the public child welfare system across the country. And another part of our mission is to assist states, tribes, and territories in recruiting, engaging, developing, and supporting foster and adoptive families. And so we do multiple things in our project. We have multiple parts of our work to help us accomplish this mission, but it includes working directly with tribes, territories, states, counties, and their private agency partners to build the capacity to recruit and develop and support foster, adoptive, and kinship families. So we're excited to get to do presentations like this one, as well as working directly with individual child welfare systems to help you build your capacity. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Ligia and let you dive in. Ligia, you're muted too now, sorry.
Thank you, Alicia, I just saw that. A big part of our conversation today has a few goals, and they're really set in place so that it can help us stay focused and know exactly what content we're going to be providing for you today. The first is an overview of just key concepts for effective foster parent recruitment. We're going to share specific strategies, which I think will be helpful. We also want to learn from you some strategies that you've used in your own communities to recruit families. And then we're going to explore ways to apply these strategies. We're going to share some helpful resources that we've developed in partnership with some of our privately contracted folks on how to recruit families. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to learn from each other. And part of that will take place in the Q&A. So I know we mentioned earlier that we definitely want you to be active in the chat and share questions and raise your hands. Just know that we do have allotted time within this presentation at the end for you to ask as many questions as you need to, as you would like. And then in regards to the agenda, again, thank you for joining us today. We're going to cover key concepts, specific strategies, ways to adapt those strategies. And again, like I mentioned, we'll talk about resources and Q&A. Oh, I went too fast.
Great. So as we get started, one of the things that Ligia just mentioned on the agenda is we want to talk about some ways you can adapt the ideas we share. And so I want to just take a moment and really recognize that we're going to be sharing a lot of ideas from the field, ideas that other tribes and tribal consortia and collaborations have found effective for recruiting and responding to foster families. But we recognize that this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of work. And so as we share ideas, we really want to make sure that we're naming this and that you're thinking about the fact that every community is different, every child welfare system structure is different. And so the ideas that we share may need to be adapted and adjusted to really fit your work and your community and the traditions, the geography, the dynamics, the relationships that you're working with. And so we'll raise some of those ideas for ways to think about how you can adapt the ideas. But I think as you hear ideas from us, we really encourage you to think about what would you need to do to take that idea and maybe adjust it a bit or turn it on its head to make it fit for your work. And we'd love to hear those thoughts from you if you want to share thoughts in the chat as we go, as we're describing strategies or ideas, you might have thoughts of, oh, we did something similar. Here's how we made it work for us. Here's how it worked in a more rural community, or here's how we infused our language into some of these strategies. So we just want to really honor that this is not a formula that you can just say, here's a 3-step plan and it'll work everywhere. But knowing that you can really combine the strengths and the wisdom of the communities you're working with and working in with some of these broader ideas, and hopefully bring those together to really help you recruit foster families. So first, we want to lay out some key concepts in foster parent recruitment before we get into the very specific strategies, because what we've found is that recruiting foster families really takes some sort of attitudes and underlying foundational approaches to guide the work. And this can also help you come up with some really good specific strategies and activities. But there are key concepts that help when we're all on the same page in thinking about effective foster parent recruitment. One of these key concepts that will probably keep coming up a lot throughout our discussion today is the importance of both knowing what your data tells you and really using your data to make decisions and to prioritize your efforts, and to share that data in meaningful ways as you're talking with others and informing your community. And when we talk about data, we mean both the quantitative and the qualitative data. So the quantitative, where you've got numbers of children who are in foster care, or numbers that really get into the details of who are the children in foster care, how many are teens, how many are members of sibling groups, how many maybe have complex medical needs, how many are placed off reservation, but you'd like to have them brought back on reservation. So there are those hard numbers that you can run reports on and make good graphs out of and things like that. But there's also the qualitative data that's really important. What's the feedback that you're hearing from your foster families, your relative caregivers, from your community? What are you hearing from children and youth in foster care themselves about what the needs are? What are you hearing as you look at why families maybe stop pursuing becoming foster parents if they start the process and don't continue on to become licensed? Or if they've been a foster parent and they decide to stop, what feedback are you getting from exit surveys or from other conversations with them? So thinking about that data in a really holistic way, so that you know what's the picture of your needs, your strengths, and what you need to communicate as you're raising awareness about the need to recruit more foster families. Another key concept is to really be intentional and be thinking about the fact that there are often a lot of misunderstandings and myths and misconceptions out in our communities about what foster care is, about why children are in foster care, about who's eligible to become a foster parent, about what supports are available. There are a lot of things that maybe used to be true and the rules may have changed, or may just be misconceptions that have grown over the years, but that don't have a basis in reality. And that those misconceptions or those perceptions and myths can really be a barrier to effective recruitment. If you're kind of working against misinformation, but you may not know what those myths are out there, or what people may have as perceptions, it can make it more challenging to effectively recruit foster parents. So you can think about what those things may be, and sometimes just having conversations in the community is a good way to learn what people's perceptions are. One of the areas that we hear a lot is that there are misconceptions about what is disqualifying for becoming a foster parent, or what the requirements are. Some people hear that a background check is required, and they assume that means if anything shows up on the background check, that they wouldn't then be able to be a foster parent. And so dispelling that myth can be really helpful, so people can know if they bounced checks 20 years ago, that's probably not disqualifying. You know, that there's room to work with people about what is and isn't allowable with their backgrounds. Some people think they have to be homeowners or have other kind of status or property. And that's, depending on your licensing standards, that's not the case in most places. And so you can think about what are those things that may be stopping people from even considering becoming foster parents and sort of ruling themselves out when they wouldn't need to. Another really important concept here, and it's something we hear all across the country and every community we've worked in, that word of mouth recruitment is really one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, recruitment strategy there is. And so that informal, that word of mouth communication, people who are foster parents or kinship caregivers telling others about their experience, sharing their insights, talking about what motivated them to be a support to children and families involved in foster care. That is so powerful. And so as we think about recruitment strategies, it's really helpful to keep that in mind, that the experiences of your current pool of foster families and kinship caregivers, um, their experiences really affect what the community perceptions are, and it affects how you're able to recruit. So keeping that in mind is a key piece as you think about your strategies. Another key concept here is to be really clear about what you're looking for in foster parents. And sometimes we look at things like they have, more concrete things. They have room in their home. They have schedules that maybe will work for caring for children. But also think about what are those kinds of skills, those beliefs, those attitudes, those qualities that we're looking for, like resilience and sense of humor and strong advocates for children, ability to navigate complex systems, perhaps. But if you can think about those kind of characteristics, dedicated to their community and to carrying on traditions, those kinds of things, as you think about them, can really help you then narrow in on what kind of recruitment strategies will be helpful, but also how can we find more people in our communities who have those characteristics and those skills that we're looking for. So it can kind of take you beyond maybe minimum requirements that you're looking for, and really that idea of, if we often have those foster families or those kinship caregivers where we think if we had 10 more like them, we'd be able to really meet our children's needs. So you can think about what is it about those families or those parents that really make them so special, and how can we try to find more people like them. Some more concepts here to highlight. One is really the importance of understanding that key role of doing strong relationship building and engagement of prospective and current foster families and kinship caregivers. And I think this feels both obvious, but we want to say it, that in child welfare work, certainly in child protection work, in looking at trying to support children and families who may be going through really hard times, sometimes that crisis level work makes it challenging to really be mindful of how are we doing intentional relationship building with our prospective foster parents, with our current foster families, and how are we getting them and keeping them engaged. How are we building trust with them? How are we communicating clearly and regularly? But showing our prospective foster parents that we really do value them and we want to engage them and help them explore this process. It goes such a long way in making our foster family recruitment efforts more successful. So we're maybe bringing in families who are interested, and we're showing them we want to walk with them through that process, through the paperwork and the training and the licensure process. It's really helpful to make that an engaging process where you're building that trust and that relationship with them. It helps with the recruitment piece, but it also helps keep them engaged so that you keep them as your part of your pool of foster families for the longer term. Changing gears a little bit, another key thing to think about is when you're looking at possible events and activities where you may want to have a recruitment presence. It's really helpful to think about which of those events are really appropriate for having perhaps a recruitment booth or table or handing out flyers or making a presentation, and which events may not be appropriate for that. And that's for you to read, certainly, in terms of what's a good fit in your community or in the communities you're working in. We know we've heard from some tribal child welfare systems where they've said, we really want to recruit at our powwows. We want to have a presence there. That's an important time to reach potential foster families. And other tribes have said, that's not an appropriate time to have sort of what feels like a distraction or pulling away from the focus of our celebrations or our ceremonies. So thinking about that so that you can really, this is an opportunity where you can think about how to adapt or make things fit for where you're working, recognizing that some gatherings, some events are a good fit for raising awareness about the need for foster families and having information about becoming a foster parent. And others, perhaps it's a better time to stand back and maybe be present and let people know that you're there and you are recruiting, but not make it something that pulls away from the focus and the energy of that event. Another key thing to think about, and we won't go too much into it in this session, but it really ties so closely with the recruitment piece. As I've mentioned, that idea of being engaging, we really need to think beyond just the recruitment strategies and activities themselves to thinking about how will we respond to families when they inquire, when they call us or they email us or they send us a Facebook message or they come up to our booth at a recruitment event, what's that response that they'll receive from us both in the moment and on an ongoing basis? And so we talk about that in terms of it being a response system, even if you don't think of it as a formal system, whatever that process is for whoever returns those messages or sends out packets of information, thinking about how that response system and those response efforts really help reinforce the idea that we do want more foster families, we value prospective foster parents, and that we want to start building that relationship with them. So as you think about recruitment strategies, you can also think about how do we make sure we have the capacity to respond when our recruitment strategies are successful. So that's a lot of conceptual pieces that I've just thrown out for all of you. And we know that you're probably looking for some specific strategies. So we're going to get into that now. This may be the part that feels more concrete and things that you can apply in your work. So as we go through these, Ligia and I'll be mentioning multiple strategies. Again, I want to encourage you to think about how you could make these work or something like these work in your communities. And it might not sound or look just like how we're describing it, but we really encourage you to take these as sort of initial thoughts that you could then adapt and make your own. One thing that I've seen be really effective in some tribal communities is holding community forums or discussions or kind of an open conversation to raise awareness about foster care and about the needs of children who are in foster care in a community, and to not frame it as a recruitment event and not have that expectation that you're going to recruit families right there, but to really have it be kind of the start of a conversation. And that can help dispel some of those myths or misconceptions about foster parenting, about what the requirements are, about why children enter foster care, about what the expectations are for foster parents. Having it be a conversation and discussion sessions can help give people a chance to learn more in a low pressure situation, but it also helps them think about ways that they might be able to be supportive to children and families who are involved in child welfare systems. And so they might not be ready to become a foster parent, but maybe they're interested in providing respite care or providing support to foster families, or being a mentor to children who are in care. So it's a great way to keep raising awareness and kind of lay the groundwork. And some of the people who come to those sessions may be interested in moving forward and becoming foster parents soon, but they might also just think about it for a while, and months or years down the road might be ready to come forward as foster parents then. Another strategy you can use is building on this idea that I mentioned about the value of word of mouth recruitment and really formalize that as a recruitment strategy or a set of recruitment strategies that you would use. And so to make that a little more concrete, some places have put into place the idea of really asking their current foster families if they would be willing to proactively try to recruit additional families. And that can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes that means agencies provide a referral payment, a referral bonus to their foster families who recruit additional foster families. Sometimes they structure that based on, it's not just you get a bonus if someone else calls and inquires, but maybe if that referred family makes it through to start the training process or completes the pre-service training or gets to some step or milestone kind of further into the process. But even without those financial incentives, you can formalize it by giving those foster parents who are interested in be part of it, you can give them talking points or little flyers with information or kind of a did you know brochure that they can give out to people they're talking to, or they can just use that for their own reference so they can share accurate information and data about the children and youth who are in care, what the requirements are for being a foster parent, what the needs are overall in the community. But you can think about those kind of tools that you can equip foster families with so that they may feel more comfortable and that they know they're really empowered and encouraged by you to help be part of that recruitment effort. You can also look at having opportunities to highlight stories and direct presentations from your foster families, either at events that you organize or encouraging them to look for those opportunities, perhaps in community groups that they're part of or in online social media groups that they're part of, but really looking at how you can help take that idea of word of mouth recruitment and encourage it much more and equip families to feel comfortable doing that. It can be a great way to expand the reach of your recruitment efforts and really empower those people who are such strong voices for the need for more foster families. Another strategy we've seen be really effective in several places is having recruitment fairs. And sometimes this has been done with either multiple tribes that are working in nearby, working together, having a collaborative recruitment fair, or partnering sometimes with maybe a tribe partnering with a state agency or a county agency if they want to have that shared presence and be able to reach families and say, here are multiple pathways that you could pursue if you want to become licensed by the tribe or by the state. But to show that collaboration where that exists, it's a great opportunity to do that. But even if it's not a collaborative recruitment fair, you can put together opportunities to really have organized information and a time for people to come find out about opportunities to become foster parents. You could also coordinate with other groups that maybe are looking for community volunteers or other ways that people can be involved. So it's not just about foster parenting, but it could be about a mix of opportunities for ways that people can take on roles to be more of a support in their community. So we're going to keep throwing out some more strategies for you. I hope you're thinking about ways you might be able to use these and maybe make them fit for where you're working. Another approach, and this is sort of a different twist, but this is looking at recruiting and licensing people to be what I've heard referred to as just in case kinship foster parents. And this is certainly, whether or not this would work for you would depend on, your staff capacity and whether you have the time and the bandwidth to do this. But some places, some tribes that we've worked with have taken this approach where, especially if there are families in the community where they have a concern that some of their relatives, the children are likely to enter foster care. They have gone ahead and worked with relatives who have that concern to go ahead and get licensed as kinship caregivers, as kinship foster parents, kind of as an ahead of time plan, so that if the child does come in or those children do enter foster care, there's already a licensed placement where the agency can place children with relatives right away, and that foster family can go ahead and receive whatever financial and other supports you have available for licensed families that can just be in place right away. Again, that probably isn't a good fit for everyone, but that's something that some places have done, and it has gotten some people then thinking, well, I could do this for my family members and my relatives, but maybe I could also be a resource to other children, even if the relatives that I'm concerned about entering care, even if they don't come into foster care, maybe I can be a foster parent to other children. So it is one thing to look at. And again, that would be one to really think about whether it would be a good fit for you, or if there'd be some modification of that idea that would be helpful. Another one here, and this is kind of a combination of a key concept and a specific strategy. So bear with me here as we blend this. But the key concept is to really think about your recruitment efforts being focused on reaching people where they are, where they gather, where they get their information. And so thinking about sort of where can we find them, whether it's actually going out and finding them in the community or thinking about where can we reach them with our messages about the need for foster parents. And so some of the examples that we have here, these are specific strategies you could try. You can probably think of others that really are a good fit for the families you're trying to reach. But you may want to think about having specific recruitment messages on tribal radio. And maybe it's messages that come from you and your staff, or maybe it's other trusted voices could be the ones really sharing the message about the need for foster families. So you can think about who the effective messenger is there. You can have information in newspapers that go out to families and think about maybe even, is there timing or are there parts of the newspaper where you could get a specific message that's really going to resonate with people or reach people. Do more people read the paper on weekends or on certain days of the week? Could you time it that way? Another popular way of recruiting, especially we've heard from many, many tribes, is really connecting with sporting events. So if there are basketball tournaments or lacrosse tournaments or other festivals that have high school sports or youth sports, it's a great time to reach a lot of families who are gathering together and get that message out. I think the one flip side of this is also to think about knowing if those sporting events, especially tournaments, are a really big gathering point and an important event in your community. Maybe don't counter schedule an orientation session or a training session for families that would compete with those. So recognizing both how are these opportunities to reach potential families, but also how do we recognize the importance of these events in our communities and not schedule against them. Another option that a lot of places have found helpful is having information in Indian Health Service offices. So whether that's flyers on the table or little table tent pieces of information about recruitment, about the need for foster parents, or some places have run information on TVs in the waiting room or in the lobby at Indian Health Service locations. But thinking about, again, where do people gather, where are they waiting, and maybe an audience to reach with some information. You can also think about other community centers and other gathering places, and think about where would those places be, but also what's the best way to have information. Is it on a bulletin board that everyone checks, or is it a flyer that should be included in packets that various places send out? But really be thinking about who's already communicating or interacting with the potential foster parents that you want to reach, and how can you make use of that. So with that, Ligia, I think I'm handing over to you to dive into some more strategies.
Yes, you are. Thanks, Alicia. And just picking up kind of where Alicia left off, we still have some more recruitment strategies to share with you. One that I want us to consider today is target, right? Target recruitment efforts towards people who have shown interest in working with youth, or as Alicia mentioned previously, have certain skills that are really great to have to work with the children in particular that we are serving. I think about teachers, coaches, individuals that are volunteering in the community. Think about those people who have reached out and said, I don't know if I necessarily want to be a foster parent yet, but I would love to be helpful in a way that matters. And so in a lot of my work as a recruiter in multiple states, one of the things that we've tried to do is when we're reaching out, we had a huge need for nursing folks who knew how to care for our most fragile, health fragile young people. And we connected with a nursing association, and we're able to go out there and speak on our need, what we needed. And what we learned was that when we targeted it that way, we were able to not only bring in families that could meet the needs of the children that we were serving, but then that also we then subsequently ended up with volunteers and folks in the community who really wanted to support the children that we were serving and support our work in the community as well. It's also important to elevate the voice of young people. I've been saying this for quite some time now. To me, the most experienced people with the experts on foster care are those who have lived it. And so oftentimes we center conversations on what we need to do for young people without ever really talking to young people about what they need from foster families. And so think about a focus group that might be able to, with young people, that where you can just generate new ideas to recruitment, where they can say, I really liked what this foster parent was able to do, and kind of generate a list of characteristics of families that you're looking for to serve kids well. And just think about, have the young person be a thinking partner with you to provide some innovative ways to engage the community, especially now. I mean, I think across the country, we are experiencing some really challenging times with recruiting families. And so asking young people in a focus group, for example, could be a great way to start generating some new ideas and thinking about how can we do this differently. And then provide other ways for people to support young kids in foster care. I cannot tell you the number of times we've had families that really thought that they were ready to foster, but really wanted to start off a little bit slower and would say things to us like, I really just want to help this young lady help someone buy a dress for prom, or I want to make sure that they have, what they need over the holidays in gifts or for their birthdays. There's a ton of ways for families who may not just be ready to foster just yet, to partner with our organizations in ways that matter and that have an impact. And so oftentimes those families that volunteer with us, right, that partner with us, end up being foster families. And so it's really important, like Alicia was saying, it's not just we want more families, but are we ready to provide different options in how they can provide support to our young people? And what does our customer service look like in those spaces?
Ligia, I'm wondering if I can jump in here just to
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit.
Sure.
I just want to share a couple of things. Thinking back to one of the tribes I worked with, where they had the community sessions, the discussion forums that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that came up in that conversation, one of the conversations that I was part of, was the agency staff were talking about various ways that families could support children in foster care besides becoming a foster parent. And they talked about the idea of respite care and providing respite care. And in having the conversation, people in the room realized that there were misunderstandings about what the concept of respite care was.
Right.
And someone, at least a few people, thought it was the same as hospice care. And so they had been hearing, you can provide respite care, and they were thinking that this was really dealing with end of life care and a very different kind of experience and skill set needed than what was intended. And
Right.
so I think it's just one example I wanted to highlight here of the importance of those kind of community conversations and addressing misconceptions that no one knew was out there. No one would have thought to say we need to really explain this better. But it is what highlighted that, we use terms in this work that people may not understand. I think that's one important thing to always highlight, that we have our own kind of jargon that we're assuming people understand. But also that, that there's a misconception there about what that was. And that when people heard, oh, well, providing respite care means I can be an additional support and give families and children kind of a break and maybe provide other activities, that's something I could do. So it was someone
Right.
who had specifically thought, I can't do this thing that they're saying maybe there's a need for, but once they understood what the opportunity was, it was a specific form of support that they could come forward and do. And so I think it had so many lessons in it for me that I think are worth highlighting. I think thinking about things like that, I mean, like some of the other examples on the slide here about providing cultural lessons, we can think about sometimes people are interested in, okay, I want to be part of supporting children in foster care, but I don't know how. I don't know what I would be able to do. They might say, I don't drive, or I don't cook, or things like that. But maybe they are really good at teaching beading, or maybe they have
Right.
stories that would be really important to share with a child, and can be part of providing those cultural teachings to children as that they may also be getting in their foster placement, in their foster family, but it could be an additional support, and it's helping those children get deeper connections to their community and to their tribe. So I think highlighting those kind of examples, and having those kind of options, and helping people then explore maybe there are other things they can think of that they could do to support children in foster care or support foster families that we might not think of. But I think it's great to think about how can you open those conversations up and break down the misconceptions, but also really tap into that creative thinking about, well, maybe I can't be a foster parent, or I won't be right now, but here are some other ways that I could be helpful. And whether that ever progresses to them then becoming foster parents or not, they're still part of that network of supporting the children in care and supporting foster families, which helps them stay engaged as foster parents. So thanks for letting me jump in on that one. I just
No, that
wanted to
was
share
great.
those deeper examples. I think there's some great opportunities there.
That was great, Alicia. Thank you. And then, of course, we have some more specific recruitment strategies. I really love this first point about engaging elders. And it's really about thinking about those trusted voices in your community and your tribe that have influence, but also can help center this conversation on how do we support young people in foster care. People who can be champions, really, is what we're thinking about in this space, who can be champions for the mission of supporting young people in child welfare. And in particular, I think that these engaging elders and those champions, those are the people who can, in really great ways, connect with the community and have a trusted voice in the community, where people will listen and feel connected to a story or what's happening or what the need is. And so be thinking about ways to engage elders, elected officials on multiple levels of this work. I think Alicia mentioned it beautifully. It's not just the work of being a foster parent, but also cultural lessons, supporting young people, teaching them about their language, their heritage, and how do we do that in child welfare in ways that matter and that are sustainable for kiddos. I think the next part too for me would be the use of social media to share positive stories and engaging the community. A lot. There's a lot to be said about things with social media that aren't going well. I think a lot of us could list them in the chat, but really thinking about how do we leverage social media in a way that we can share these stories of not just young people, but successful stories for foster families giving testimony, sharing how nervous they were when they first were considering fostering, and then how it ended in the end, how it turned out for them and for the children that they were caring for. I think stories connected with strategies have a huge impact in our work. And when we connect the two and use it, especially in social media, I think that it gives space for us to connect with families in a different way. I think the pandemic definitely taught us how to leverage social media to keep the work going, but also to keep families interested in fostering or mentoring and connecting with the children that we're serving. So think of ways to use stories to share about the good things happening in foster care. One story I can think of was we had a young lady who was finally being placed with a family that she was really wanting to really get to know and take time to get to know them. So we went slow, and she was 17 years old, and in that work that she was able to kind of learn how to connect with a family when the time came for them to want to share their story of fostering. We went ahead and recorded it, and it was, the foster mom was able to share some of the many lessons that she learned along the way, not just about our system, which can be complicated and, like Alicia said, have lots of terms and lingo that don't necessarily make sense to people who aren't in our work, but also that it allowed for her to connect, for the foster mom to connect with other women or families that were interested in fostering, and that we saw some families want to join our mission or our work, becoming foster parents. And I think that's that word of mouth that Alicia was talking about. This is another way to use word of mouth, is through social media. And then licensed relative caregivers as foster parents for other children. I think in this space, and in particular, we can talk about how do we license tribal members, how do we encourage our tribe to be part of caring for this child or these children. And I think that, our practices and our policies really need to be looked at. When I was a director of foster care and adoption, one of the things that I did with my team was I would sit down and look at our policies and practices and see, were we really connecting with families and relatives in ways that mattered? And were we providing the same support that they needed? And I think that considering relatives and tribal members as foster parents is helpful on many levels, from cultural experiences to knowing what it means to be family and what it means to stand in the gap for the children that we're serving. And so another great way to kind of look at your specific recruitment strategies is, how are we licensing and connecting with tribal members and relative caregivers?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in again here, if that's okay. Just this is another one that I get passionate about. Um, Building on what Ligia said, I think we've also seen that often our relative caregivers, they step forward when a child enters care, and they weren't planning on doing this. This is sort of an emergency situation, and they may become relative caregivers, whether licensed or not initially, really, in order to care for their relative. And for those who do go on, and sometimes they become licensed in maybe with a child specific license, depending on how you do licensure in your tribe or your agency. But in some cases, relatives will say, yes, I'll get licensed, but not sort of to be a general foster parent. It's really for this child or for these children who are my relatives. But often what we've seen is that some of those caregivers see, okay, I can make such a difference, not just in the lives of children who I'm closely related to, but to other children who are part of my community and part of our tribe. And so some of them, they may not think to ask, could I become kind of a quote unquote regular foster parent or a foster parent to unrelated children? But if we can initiate that as a conversation and say, we see these great strengths in you, we see how good of a caregiver you are, how good of an advocate you are, how much you're really thoughtful about this, how you're understanding how to navigate this child welfare system. Really making that kind of a recognition of their strengths and their capabilities, and inviting them without pressuring them to consider being a foster parent to other children. And not all of them will say yes. Maybe it won't be a widely accepted invitation, but even if some of those caregivers, those relative caregivers, are interested in becoming a resource to other children, that helps you with your recruitment needs and it builds that pool. And it also then keeps demonstrating to others that being a relative caregiver might mean in the short term you're really, you're focused on those children who are your relatives, but that there are pathways to then becoming a foster parent to other children as well. So I just think it's something to think about. It's almost kind of re-recruiting from this pool of families that you're
Right.
already working with. But again, sometimes we have to be the ones to really initiate that as a conversation and name that as an option, and just sort of to plant that seed for relative caregivers to think about. And they might say, well, I'm not going to do it right now. Well, I've got these 3 kids in my home. That's maybe not the right time. But we've certainly seen it many times where they would say, but once we're able to, support reunification and children go home, or once the kids are older, whatever that piece is, there may be a point down the road where they would say, yeah, I would be open to being a foster parent to other children. So it's an untapped resource in a lot of ways. And then you're looking at people who already understand dynamics of foster care and working with the
Right.
agency and all of that. So it can be sometimes a lower barrier to entry for adding to your pool of foster parents. Okay, I'll stop chiming in on that one again, Leah.
No, you're fine. Great insight. I love it. I love it. And now we want to take some time and hear from you. We've given you tons of concepts and strategies, and we'd love for you to share in the chat what recruitment strategies are working for you within your own organization and your own work. Again, we're here to share some strategies, but we also want to learn from you as well. What's working well for you? Please feel free to share that in the chat. And Alicia, if you could look in the chat and just let me know.
Yep, I'll keep an eye on the chat. I haven't seen any questions come in, and we'll see if there are comments that come in.
Okay.
See word of mouth here coming in as an approach that's worked for you. Yep, thank you for sharing that. I think when we're asked, we are often asked with all of the jurisdictions, the child welfare systems that we work with, what is the most effective recruitment strategy? What's the one thing we should do? And people are often looking for, it's like the best design billboard in the best location, or it's the, the sort of the I don't know, the best brochure we could put together, or the best
Right.
message to have at a community fair. But it really is word of mouth. And I'll riff off of that a little bit since you put that in the chat. I know I mentioned it earlier, but one of the things that is really important to think about for word of mouth recruitment is, as I mentioned, the experience of your current foster families and your current relative caregivers. That is what affects word of mouth recruitment. And
Right.
so one of the things that people often get tired of hearing me say is word of mouth recruitment is your most effective form of recruitment, and it's your most effective form of anti-recruitment.
Yes.
So if your current foster families or your former foster families and kinship caregivers don't have positive experiences, don't get their calls returned, struggle to access the services that they need to meet the needs of the children they're parenting, they're going to talk about that too. And so often thinking about your ongoing foster family and kinship family support and engagement and customer service principles, which is something we talk a lot about, um, viewing those activities not as separate from recruitment, but really as a foundational part of your recruitment, because it keeps your current pool of families, but it also helps them have positive things to share in their word of mouth. That can be a really helpful way to think about things that don't feel like recruitment strategies necessarily, but
Right.
calling families back or making sure they get their foster parent payments on time, or
Right.
access to medical services for children. But it is really helpful to think about word of mouth can go in multiple ways. I mean, you all have probably had that. If you loved a restaurant, you probably told a few people about it. If you hated a restaurant, you probably told even more people about it. So
Correct.
recognizing the power of word of mouth, I think is really crucial.
And I love that idea, Alicia, of like considering word of mouth and connecting that to our customer service, our work in customer service, and how we really care for our families well. That will definitely be what steers the ship around if word of mouth isn't going so great.
Yeah.
And I've been there, so I know. I don't see any other ideas in the chat, so I'm gonna move on. If you do have more ideas, please feel free to put them in there. We'll
Oh, here
definitely.
we see we had another one pop up here.
Oh,
Let's see here.
okay.
Just trying to read this through here. One event we tried to keep doing was acknowledging the foster care month at the conference. Yep. And
Yes.
gave out appreciation baskets to the foster parents or adoptive parents who show. That's great.
Yes,
And I
great.
think looking at those kind of events that can be learning events like a conference or a training, combined with appreciation and recognition, I think it's so valuable, again, both to support your current families and really recognize what they do for their the children and community. But also it's a way to raise that awareness about the need for more foster families or kinship families, adoptive families. So I think it's great to think about that, of how can you have those kind of events and activities that are um, achieving multiple purposes in one. Ligia, since we have time here, I want to just throw out a couple more
Sure.
thoughts in case, and this may spark some thoughts for others. One thing that I know some tribes have done, and this again doesn't feel maybe like a glamorous or a traditional kind of recruitment strategy, but going back to, as Ligia mentioned, the idea of looking at your policies and practices and procedures. Some tribes have said we really want to review our licensing standards and update those because we think they might be outdated or might have too many barriers, or maybe we just sort of copied and pasted from a state many years ago and it doesn't really fit our values and our community and our traditions. Um, but in wanting to do that, they wanted to involve the community in that, and so they formed essentially a working group, a small working group, but they put that out to the community saying, we're looking for people to be part of, this kind of advisory group to help us look at, do these licensing standards for foster families fit? What do we need to revise? What do we need to update? And again, that was it's sort of that idea of the community conversation. By engaging people in that process, it raised awareness. It broke down some misconceptions about what the requirements are for being licensed as a foster parent. It also had people sort of advocating for, okay, these were written maybe when our housing situation was very different, or, it doesn't recognize the way people live in our community now, or it doesn't recognize where people live. Maybe there's been real geographic shifts. So having that be something where it could very easily be two of us in the office are just going to sort of dive in and rework the licensing standards on our own.
Absolutely.
Or it can be an opportunity to engage members of the community and kind of bring in more champions and more advocates who can then help be additional voices about the realities of becoming licensed as a foster parent.
Alicia, we do have another comment. Let's see if I can get it through here. Okay, yeah. Foster care banquet for retention, foster care licensing presentations, foster care booths of information about licensing. All of those are great ideas. I will say, kind of to couple with what was just mentioned, the same way you kind of review your licensing practices and you review kind of like what are policies and which to help with your retention of foster families. I think it's also important to definitely have those booths and those tables with information at locations where you're going to get the most out of it. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes I spent years going to this one festival where we never generated any real interest in fostering. So just really as a team looking around and saying, the world has changed, things have changed, which are the spaces that have always like yielded good results for us, and what are some new spaces we need to step into and just kind of see if we can connect with. So just be thinking about how do we kind of evolve and not just do the same festivals or the same conferences every year, but really thinking about where are we speaking and where are we sharing information. are we going where our community is? And I think that once you you can tweak that if you need to, you'll see some good results as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing in the chat, everyone. Feel free to
Yes,
keep sharing even as we move on. It's great for others in the workshop to get to read about what you're doing or what you found helpful.
Yes.
And as a reminder, feel free again to put questions in the chat, and we'll get to those as we move on. I do see someone has their hand up. Alejandro, I think maybe you can come off mute if you've got something to add.
Are we not at the Q&A section yet? Am I too early?
We're not quite there, but if you want to jump in right now, we can do that, and then we'll finish up the rest of the presentation. So go ahead.
No, I'll wait.
Okay, all right. We'll get there soon though.
All right, so I'll move along. I'm really excited about these strategies because it's really about, Alicia and I can come here and give you all kinds of strategies and all kinds of ideas, but we really want you to be thinking about what really fits inside our community, what really fits for our culture, for our people, for the kids that we're serving. And so here are some additional ideas for you to consider. Use your language and images and other meaningful elements in your foster parent recruitment strategies and materials. For example, when you are, a lot of folks right now are using Facebook to show awareness and say, hey, here's our flyer, we're gonna have an event, please come and join us to learn more. Do the images in that flyer reflect the families that you need, or does it reflect the children that you're serving? And so just being mindful of, even a picture goes a long way. And I know that even in our own work, we try to be really mindful of what we're sharing, how we're sharing it, what languages we're using. It's important for us to remember that every community is different, and every community has the right to share what they need in ways that will be well received by the community. And so just as you're creating your recruitment materials, your flyers, your virtual flyers, just be thinking about who are we wanting to recruit, and how does our messaging reflect that?
I'm going to do another pop in here on this, just because there's another example that comes to mind, especially about the language piece. And so this is one of the groups that I got to work with years ago. It was really a privilege to get to work with, was a federally funded project. It was a collaboration called Native Families for Native Children. And so it involved 4 tribes and 2 states. So you all can imagine all of the coordination that went into that. But they were really looking at how can they look at really strengthening their diligent recruitment efforts to recruit and prepare and support foster and kinship families in their communities, and working with the states that were involved and the tribes, and sharing knowledge and resources with each other. One of the many things that grew out of that project was one of the tribes involved really wanted to develop their family group decision-making and family group conferencing practices in child welfare. And so it was a little bit separate from the recruitment specifically, but it was really part of this idea of how are we keeping families together? How are we supporting reunification? How are we supporting children and families in our community? But they didn't want to use the term family group decision-making. That felt like it was not a good fit for them. And so they looked within their tribal language, they found terminology that really reflected their values. And I don't remember the exact meaning that they explained to me, but it was really about that idea of shared ideas and shared decision-making and planning. But they found words that were meaningful for their community to capture that idea. So that was what they named that program for doing that family group decision-making. And so in doing that, they also really kind of redesigned that approach, taking some of the more Western models and really saying, this is what works for our community. This is how we're going to build in shared decision-making approaches and listening to multiple voices that are part of our traditions that we use in other parts of our life here. So they really were able to look at that and say, it's not just a matter of putting a different name on the activity or on the program, but it's really making it our own and making it align with our values and our practices. And so I think there are ideas there that you can also look at in terms of when you're recruiting or when you're talking about foster parents or foster parenting, there might be terms and images and concepts that really work in your community that capture the ideas that you're looking for. And so that, you can think about ways to really make that fit and resonate with people, so that as you're looking at recruitment efforts, it doesn't have to be even using the same term. Maybe there's another term or phrase in your language that would reflect what you mean by foster parent better than even the
Right.
term foster parent. So we think thinking about that creatively can be a good way to really tap into what can you do to make this really be a fit for the families you're looking to reach, and conveying the messages that you want and the values that you want.
Thanks, Alicia. That was great. The next part is reviewing your data. I think Alicia mentioned this earlier, and I think it's a valid point in that when we review our data on the kids that we're serving, data is important because it matters. It tells a story, and it helps us identify the needs that we have within our own organization to meet the needs of the children that we're working with. And so reviewing data can help identify what kinds of families are needed within your system. And at the same time, help you start thinking about who would be a good fit within those families for specific children. And so, I think reviewing data goes hand in hand with a recruitment plan and thinking through all the steps on, like Alicia just mentioned, the language that we use, what does our community really connect with? The data also plays a major role in that because, again, it will tell a story, but it'll also identify where there may be gaps in support for young people and gaps in how many foster families you have. So I would urge you to not just look at the data on young people, but also look at the data on the types of foster families you have, how many foster families you have, what's your retention rate, do we have an exit interview with the families that are, no longer deciding to foster with us? What can we learn from them? All of those pieces connect to data and help us really identify where we're going with the work that we're doing. And then I mentioned this earlier, and this is one piece that I actually really took a hard look at every year as a director, was reviewing our licensing and approval standards, making sure that what we had in place, it wasn't something that we had in place 15 years ago, when we know that our communities have changed, our work has changed, the number of children that we have in care has changed, and the expertise that the skill set that we want families to have has changed over time. How does our policies and our strategies reflect how our communities have evolved and changed? And so I think it's really important to take some time to look at those practices, look at those standards, and consider ways to revise them in ways that will help families really want to be a part of our work, want to be a part of this mission. And I think of some of the things that we did internally at our organization was, when I was the director, was really looking at, okay, so how soon are we having families come in and license, go through the licensure training process? And what we learned was that it was taking us a long time. And it was simple things that we could have tweaked in our own licensing approval standards that made all the difference for families. So just be thinking about those ways that can change how you're serving families and how you're making room for how the world is changing at the same time. Alicia, did you have a specific example for this one?
No, I think this is one I'm not going to chime in on and add more.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
No, sounds good. Sounds good. And we now have resources. So I don't know, Alicia, if we wanted to maybe go to questions first.
I'm thinking I'll cover these resources fairly quickly, and then we have plenty of time for questions. So others can keep adding questions to the chat if you'd like. But I do want to talk through these resources and highlight a few of them in a little more detail, just to, I think it really ties into some of the things that Ligia and I have been covering. So as a reminder, I guess I didn't maybe say this at the beginning. So as information, because we are a federally funded project at AdoptUSKids, all of our materials, our resources, our services are free. So we want to make sure that that's clear. Everything we're highlighting here from our project, they are free resources, so we're not trying to sell you anything. And these are available for free on our website. And we're happy to have you download them, and you could share them with peers and with others. So hopefully you'll find these helpful. We have a few resources we've highlighted on the next couple of slides, and we're happy to answer questions about these as well. One is a resource called How Tribal Values and Traditions Can Guide Recruitment, Development, and Support of Resource Families. I think it gets into some great approaches for really thinking about how to ground practices, both for recruitment, but for training and ongoing learning and that ongoing support, really in your tribal practices and in your community's needs and priorities. So it's a great way to really think about your whole continuum of building and sustaining that pool of resource families. Another resource here is Fostering Extended Family Ties Between Resource Families and Birth Families in Tribal Child Welfare Practice. This is a great piece that looks at that idea of the role of foster families as a support, not just to the children that they are parenting, but to that child's birth family, and looking at ways that there can really be strengthened learning and kind of co-parenting and shared parenting between foster families and birth families, and how that can help with birth families learning some new techniques and some new parenting strategies that they may not have grown up with. And so it's a really great piece to look at how to think about that role of foster parents and how it's really strengthening community ties and building extended family between foster families and birth families. And so especially some of the examples in there where a child is reunified, that child still has this extended family of the foster parents and having them in their lives. Another great resource that we have is Recruiting Families for Native American Children, Strengthening Partnerships for Success. So this gets at some ideas for especially partnering between state and tribal agencies, if that's part of your work. So looking at ways to really aim to recruit more families for Native American children, both from a state or county child welfare system perspective and from a tribal child welfare perspective. And then let's see here, on to our next slide. These next couple of tools are a little more involved. They're not really the kind of heartwarming articles like some of the ones we just mentioned, but this first one, Developing Recruitment Plans, a Toolkit for States and Tribes. This is it is a toolkit, as it says. So this is a guide. It is not developed only for a tribal child welfare audience. So it is both for states and tribal child welfare systems. But it has really, I think, a helpful set of ideas in terms of ways to think about prioritizing your recruitment strategies. For example, thinking how much should be general recruitment versus targeted recruitment versus maybe child-specific recruitment. But one of the things I want to highlight about this toolkit, especially since we've talked about data several times today, is that this toolkit has a set of data worksheets, which I get excited about, and no one else really gets excited about the idea of a worksheet, but it has data worksheets that you can use to really kind of have it walk you through diving into your data. So as Ligia was talking about, we need to look at the data on our children in care, but also the data on our foster families. And who are they? What skill sets do they have? Do we have families for teens and for sibling groups and for children with medical needs or behavioral needs? So these worksheets are a great way to help you think about how to go from maybe a lot of data reports or raw data that you're not sure what to do with, and it kind of guide you through a process to help you really think about what is your data telling you, and help you think about prioritizing then your recruitment efforts, but also your support and your retention efforts, so that you're sustaining that pool of families once you recruit them. And then this last one listed here with the nice long name, the Diligent Recruitment Planning Tool for Tribes, a tribal supplement to the Diligent Recruitment Navigator. This is essentially a discussion guide. And so AdoptUSKids had created many years ago Diligent Recruitment Navigator, which is a lengthy, customizable discussion guide. So it offers questions rather than answers, but it's for child welfare systems and their community partners to talk through what do we need to really have a meaningful diligent recruitment program to recruit and prepare and support the families we need for children in foster care. And so this tribal supplement it's sort of a distilled version to really be targeted for tribal child welfare systems to have, you can either use it in partnership with the full Diligent Recruitment Navigator, or it can be kind of the lighter lift. But it has some really helpful prompt questions that you can talk about within your agency, with community partners, with family voices, to really have some of those discussions about what do we need, how do we build that pool of families that we need, what's working for recruitment, how do we tap into our community strengths. So it can be a great kind of organizing tool to help prompt some structured discussions. So those are some of the specific resources we wanted to highlight. I also wanted to highlight this opportunity. This is not a publication, but this is really a great opportunity. And Ligia, I'm going to have you just speak briefly, if you will, about this, since you are a resident expert on this. But yes, AdoptUSKids has this incredible, again, free program, the Minority Professional Leadership Development Program, MPLD is the acronym we use, that is open. We're accepting applications right now through September 26th. For this program. And Ligia, if it's okay with you, I will have you just say a little bit about it, if you will, since you Absolutely. Know it well.
So MPLD is a development program that I participated in 2019, and it's really its major focus is developing and amplifying the voices of emerging leaders of color in child welfare. So if you think about it as, there's this whole conversation across the country about equity and diversity and all of those pieces, and think about doing that from the inside of the organization out. So it would be kind of building up emerging leaders to be able to be change agents at your organization and in your communities. And so when I did it, a lot of the examples I gave you today about why I needed to check our data, why we went through this work, and I really needed to look at our policies and our strategies, came from my experience with MPLD. And I'll tell you this very quickly, because I know Alicia said I only got a couple of minutes. What I learned at MPLD is that I learned how to talk about our disparity rates in ways that could be well received by others, where I could communicate effectively about it in ways that would prompt change or at least discussions. And I also learned that I was a transformational leader, which means that all of us are leaders in our own right, no matter what title we hold, but that we can impact change for our kiddos and the families that we serve. And so that is what I love about MPLD most. As Alicia said, it is free. It is a 12-month program where fellows are trained on all kinds of things, from leading, managing work, and also addressing the disparities within our own child welfare organizations. So if you're interested, please go to adoptuskids.org/MPLD and check it out.
Great, thanks, Ligia. And yes, I know having a few minutes to talk about MPLD is not enough, but we did want to highlight this. This is an incredible opportunity, a leadership development opportunity for any of you who are attending. You may want to think about whether this is a good fit for you, or if you have colleagues, peers, people you supervise, or people who supervise you, who you think that this might be a good fit for. And something that we often hear is people may not see in themselves that this is a good fit. They may not think that they are at that level yet, perhaps, or that they would qualify as an emerging leader or as a current leader. And sometimes it takes having someone else say, you really could thrive in this program, and this is a great opportunity. So I think that's something we always want to encourage, is for you to think about whether it's a good fit for you and encourage yourself to do this and apply for it, but also to think about who else might need that little bit of encouragement, and that you see as they could really thrive in being part of this fellowship, where you're part of a cohort with other people in the leadership development program from across the country. And we have had a few participants from tribal child welfare systems and are always looking for more. So we just wanted to highlight this. Again, applications are due September 26th, which is coming up sooner than any of us would like to think, as the summer races by. So please do consider that and think about others who you'd want to share information about. So now we are at the question point. I do see, so I want to go back to Alejandro's question that I see you put in the chat. It was totally fine that you asked that or wanted to ask earlier. I'm not sure that either Ligia and I are going to be able to answer your question, unfortunately, but there may be others on this workshop or attending who may be able to. I'm seeing, are there partnership opportunities for tribal foster youth to attend, be employed, or access these special hire authorities? For example, the BIA Native Youth Climate Adaptation Leadership Congress, looks like National Park Service, Indian Youth Conservation Corps, other pieces. So we do not have that answer, unfortunately, but I'll put it out if anyone else knows the answer to that question about opportunities for tribal foster youth to be involved. Please chime in.
And if I may, from the experience you two have, are there networks that kind of connect these resources? I know, like, Big Brothers Big Sisters is kind of like that. Is that stepping stone? Like, do you know if there are, is there a network like that might come to mind that I might reach out to? Because what I'm doing, there's this disconnect of not knowing how to get a hold of these audiences. We want to help these people that don't have the same resources or advantages most people have, even as a travel person myself, which wasn't much. But I can only imagine what's like for someone who had another barrier or challenge to overcome, how we could connect and make sure that they know that these resources are out there, which is already my question. I'll stop talking. Thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you. It's a great question. One thing that comes to mind, I'm going to put this link in the chat. I don't know that it's quite on the point that you're asking about, but it's maybe also a helpful resource. It's called Foster Club. It's an organization that really is a strong voice of, it's led by and for youth and young adults who were formerly in foster care. It is not tribal specific. So I think most of the participants were in state child welfare systems, not tribal child welfare systems. But they really look at that idea of how do we help build the skills and the network and the connections and really help young people who were in foster care leverage their own strengths and become part of broader networks for personal development and professional development. So Foster Club, I think, is something that may be helpful for you to look into as that kind of resource. It doesn't get specifically to some of the great points you were raising about more of those kind of points of access and career paths, specifically for tribal youth especially, but it may have some good opportunities there. And Foster Club themselves, they would be a great resource. They might know of some other pathways and opportunities like that. I will also mention, I'm going to try to look this up while I'm talking, see if I can do two things at once. The Congressional Coalition on Adoption, which works with Congress in Washington, D.C., they have a foster youth internship program, which I'm trying to look up as we talk. And that program is, again, talking about sort of that idea to access. This is access for young adults who were in foster care to have access to working directly with congressional offices and to make recommendations, to make policy recommendations at a federal level through their foster youth internship program. So I'm going to put this in the chat as well. This is another pathway, where the participants in this program, I don't know how many they have each year, but I believe it's an annual internship program. But these are people who have that lived experience in foster care who are then working in this internship, working with members of Congress, with congressional offices, but putting together policy recommendations themselves. So it's in addition to, doing the kind of office work and sitting in on committee meetings and things like that, they put together recommendations that then members of Congress consider as things might need to change at a federal policy level. So it's a great way of having that kind of access that very few people really have to having a voice in the federal policy conversation. Okay, I'm checking to see if there are other questions, and if other people have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I do see a question asking if the PowerPoint will be available to download. Gwen, I think that's probably another question back to you as our moderator for this session. Are the PowerPoints going to be provided somewhere for attendees?
I believe it can be. I don't know if it's going to be downloaded here or if they're going to be emailing it. So I'll find out and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you for that.
Great, thanks.
Great.
I'm
Are there
looking
any other
I don't see any other
any other
questions.
questions? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to move us towards wrap up here, but we do still have a few minutes. So if people have additional questions you've thought of, feel free to put those in the chat, and we will get to them before we close out for the day here. But we do want you to have this information for staying in touch with AdoptUSKids. You can find all of our resources and information about our services with states and tribes and territories. You can find it on our website at adoptuskids.org. But you can also get more detailed information if you're wanting to sign up for our newsletter. We have free newsletters, email newsletters, including ones aimed at professionals working in child welfare, where we highlight new publications, new tools, upcoming webinars, things like that, announcements for example, when MPLD applications are open. So it's a great way to find out about what's coming up and what services we're offering, what new materials we have on our website as articles or tools or other publications. So we encourage you to sign up for that newsletter if you're interested in continuing to get information from us. Also, as I mentioned, you can just look around on our website and search for resources that are specific to your needs, whether it's about recruitment or family support or engagement of families, using customer service strategies as part of recruitment and support of families. Those are all available. You can also follow us on LinkedIn if that's somewhere where you like to go to get information to support your work. We are available there. So that's also an option for keeping up to date and seeing posts from AdoptUSKids. I'm not seeing any more questions come into the chat, so I think we may be wrapping up here. But I want to thank all of you for being part of this session, for chiming in the chat,
Yes,
and for taking your time out of your day. We're excited to have you here, and we know that you are all very busy, and that it's hard to carve out time for workshops, whether virtual or in person. So we really appreciate your taking the time and engaging with us. Ligia, any closing words from you?
it was a pleasure. Thank you for having us and letting us in to kind of share some of our ideas. And I had a great time.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Gwen.
ladies. That was a really nice presentation. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gwen, is there anything else you need from us to close out for the day or close out our session?
I don't need anything more from you, but thank you again. This was really interesting to me. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day.